Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Franco and everybody in Argentina, thank you very much all for joining us. Good morning in America, good afternoon in Europe and Africa, good evening in Asia. Welcome to Peace Studies for Sustainable Development. This is a series of webinars on peace and development, where we invite experts from all over the world to talk to us. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for coming, and in a particular way, to welcome our speaker today, who is Daniela Irrera. She's a professor of international relations at the University of Catania in Italy. She's visiting professor of political violence and terrorism at the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, the Academy in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. And she is president of the European Peace Research Association. Daniela is not very new to us because she was with us a few months ago and she gave a wonderful presentation. And I would like to thank her again. Thank you, Daniela, for coming to us once again. I know you are always with us, but of course that we've got lots of things to do. We cannot expect to have you every week. And it's really an honor and pleasure that you'll be speaking to us on a very important theme, which is peace education in a multicultural environment, the use of simulations and games. I would like now to welcome everybody to please mute your microphones, and we allow Daniela Irrera to speak to us. You may share, of course, your screen if you've got a PPT, and I'll ask also Franco to make you the co-host, and so that you can do that very comfortably. So thank you very much. And of course, I'm also happy to have Igor Spiegel with us today. I understand he has a meeting to attend to later, so he'll have to leave, unfortunately, but definitely is always with us. Thank you again, everybody, for coming.
Thank you very much, George. And thanks everyone for joining this this talk and for listening to me. Yeah, I'm very happy and delighted to be again with you and to share with you again some considerations about the game of peace and other active learning tools that I'm using very usually and frequently with my students in Catania, but also at the OC Academy. And I mean, compared to the previous presentation, since I was not sure whether there were other people, or I see that there are some people that I already met during the last presentation, but I also see someone new. Also, I'm delighted to hear that we are, there's the University of Buenos Aires from Argentina, that I'm very happy because I'm very interested in the Latin American countries, and I'm also working from a scientific point of view on that. So I have slightly changed a little bit my focus. So I will talk obviously again about my simulation. So the one I have designed, so Game of Peace. I share with you what I do, just for having a frank discussion on whether these tools may be useful or not as for peace education. And also some most recent experiences that I had, in particular that I, after the war in Ukraine started. So I've played a Game of Peace with a simulation on the Donbas region last year, before, when the war was just probably was just Putin's plan already, but not very far from us. And also my very recent experiences with the OC Academy. So I teach a course on political violence and terrorism there. And so I will share with you some ideas, some comments on the sadness, because this is a really sad experience for me to talk about to students that have never experienced a peaceful environment, and they don't know what peace is, they don't know what democracy is, and they tend to legitimize the war in Ukraine because Russia is fine in doing what it does because it's in its right to do that. But I will leave it for the discussion. So I try now to share my screen. So the difference, let's say, in considering what I have already discussed with you, is the fact that I try to see the use of simulations and games, particularly in very multicultural environment. So what I sustain here is it can be relatively easy to talk in Catania, for example, about democracy and peace to students who have never experienced war and who may know very well what democracy and peace are. But on the contrary, it's very difficult and it's very challenging to make such simulations in other contexts in which, with different student populations, and in which anything related to peace or to religion, to society, to relations between female and males, for example, can be very, very sensitive. So this is the focus, which is different compared to the previous presentation I had a few months ago. But I still would like to share with you my own experiences. And so probably I apologize with those who have already joined the previous presentation who may hear something for the second time. Sorry for this, but it is important for introducing what I mean. So the sense of this talk and everything starts with the idea that active learning tools are essential for students. Obviously, I talk about international relations students, or let's say international studies courses, which may be very specific or very broad, BA or MA. I also have the chance to interact with Ronald. I don't know whether Ronald is with us today, so to try to use something related to active learning tools with high school children. But anything related to international studies can be most powerfully strengthened if we use active learning tools, which means that we challenge students and we ask them to play with notions, with theories, with what they have learned. So for me, simulations and games are an essential part of any course. I teach international relations, I teach at BA, I teach global civil society to the MA students and political violence and terrorism to MA students. And in all these courses, I add, obviously, there is a theoretical part, which is essential, but then I ask students at the end to use what they have learned and studied on books, articles, etc., in real life. So in a second, I will tell you what kind of simulations I do. What is important is that students have to interact. And it is something that, for example, traditional university usually don't do. Traditional courses, let's say. So I know many of my colleagues, they just have very traditional lectures. So students go there, sit down and wait and listen for, or probably don't listen. They pretend to listen for 2 hours and or less. But in being online, as we were forced to during the pandemic and lockdown, worsened the situation. Instead, when we use simulation, students are forced to interact. So at least 2 participants, but obviously we do with many participants. So usually, for example, an MA class is a group of 20 or 25 students, but even less can be fine. So they play as individual, but most of the times they play in teams. So they play with real situation, a real conflict, a real political issue. So, for example, I ask students to draw and to draft a policy paper on environment, for example, or you will see several examples in the end. So they work with real things, real issues. So they may represent real states or non-state actors like NGOs or private companies and so on, or international organizations like the United Nations or the European Union. And also what I would like to stress is the fact that, for example, I had the chance to teach courses on the European Union foreign policy to students based in Asia. So I was in Asia. In particular, I was in India. And so teaching something related to the EU was very difficult to them because they didn't know anything about the European Union. So this kind of simulations can be also useful for introducing to students concepts that they would never, ever had a chance to develop. And also, obviously, this is something that should require lots of work on the part of instructors. So obviously, if you already had the chance to play such tools with your students, you already know. But if you don't know, don't be scared. Don't be obviously don't stop everything just because there's a lot of work required. It is obviously necessary to prepare scenarios, to prepare roles, to prepare rules, and then to observe what students do. But this is a very, very exciting part of the job. And then, obviously, I have discovered, well, I used to have a real face-to-face simulations because we usually were in a classroom. So we were having our normal, let's say, course in a classroom. But then I also had some hybrid experience because before the pandemic, I was part of a group of colleagues, including Americans, people from Brazil, people from the Middle East, from Israel, so different group of scholars who were organizing simulations with their own students. So there were different classes of students, including, for example, mine, and they had to work on Facebook. So they used to prepare a Facebook page and they used to interact on the Facebook page. And then obviously we for those who had the chance to meet in person, they continued in person. But then the COVID came out and we had to learn to use cyber experiences. So I didn't want to give up on simulation. So I started to organize cyber simulation. So still having human participants, but in a virtual environment, using Zoom, including breakout rooms, using Microsoft Teams, for example, that is the platform used in my own university. And last year, that we were forced to have hybrid teaching because restrictions not almost, but some restrictions were over, but some others were still in place, and there were still people with COVID. We used to have people in the classroom and people online, and so we had, for example, 2 rounds, or even more than 2 rounds, some face-to-face on campus and cyber on the web. So just to see that, to say that simulations can also involve students from different countries, and it is also I would be happy to do any experiment, if you like, with your own students. If we just need to set the right time zone, and then we can have this experiment with students. So students enjoy to interact with others because students know very well how to use Facebook or other kinds of platforms. So this is my my model. Well, I started just as a joke, I must confess, because I was in a conference many years ago, and I was involved in a round of simulation, and I enjoyed a lot. So I started to play with few students, and then the model became more and more appreciated. And every year, students used to give me suggestions and feedbacks. So in the end, also considering that I was a big fan of Game of Thrones, I started to use strategic ideas inspired by TV series. I'm joking, but actually I just put the name. So game without S, sorry, it's just a mistake. So Game of Peace. So this became a real module. And so this is the round that I had during the simulation, during the pandemic, for example. So I've already used this picture, but I wanted to use again because in that year, which is 2020, I won an award. I mean, my simulation won an award, and so that there was a competition among different European universities for the best tools to involve international students. So Game of Peace was awarded together with other tools. So what I do, and these are my students who everyone was online in 2020. Italy was the first country to apply lockdown, as you may know very well, as we experienced COVID since the very, very beginning. So everyone was online. I was teaching online, and I had this first experiment of a totally online Game of Peace. And so it is based on, it's a conflict resolution. It's a real conflict involving various actors and also non-state actors including, for example, terrorist groups. It depends. It depends on the case that I use, and also students are pushed to find a political solution. So these are the objectives. So this is why it's very important for me, because they have to work in teams. They have to study quite a lot, because they have to prepare themselves on the different on the conflict, and they have also to enter into their role. So they have to understand, if they are playing, for example, the representative of Turkey, they need to know exactly who Erdogan is, what can he can do, and whatever. So they have to study a lot. So there's a preliminary phase of study and learning. And then also they work in teams, and they also have to develop relational skills and negotiating skills. Students tend to, as we know very well, we all experience students to stay silent. They usually do not interact a lot. They do not. When we have a group of students, although they spend months together on following the same course, very rarely they can create a community. But these experiments and also simulations can help students to create a community. Obviously, there are also some frictions, because frictions are always possible and likely to happen. But then the sense is they have to promote a dialogue. They have to find a political solution. So in the end, they have to apply what they have learned, what they have studied in their own academic materials. So these are some experiments, some examples of things that I have played more recently. So in 2020, once again, there was no idea that the war in Donbass, war in Ukraine, was going to start. But we already knew that there was a situation, a difficult situation in Donbass, or at least I was aware of that, because before the pandemic, I used to go almost every year to Ukraine as a visiting professor. I'm in law with that country. I've worked with several universities, colleagues, students there. I've also worked with local NGOs which are committed to help. Well, before the war in Donbass, there was already a high number of internally displaced people. The conflict was already quite brutal. So I was working on the Donbass conflict even before the pandemic. And then I asked my students to work on this. And students were very, very in troubles, because nobody knew exactly what was happening in the Donbass region. There were many people even not knowing where the Donbass was located. And there was also an additional problem, because in that period, I had many international students, I mean, non-European students. And these students, because in that period, I also had an online course to a class of Indian students. And at the same time, I asked them to play on the same topic, and also to use the European Union. And it was extremely difficult for them, because I asked them to work, given that it was just a sort of local conflict in the specific region of the Donbass. The European Union to convene an international peace conference for discussing ceasefire and territorial claims. In that period, there was just a territorial claim, a divided society between the Russian, pro-Russian people, the so-called the rebels, and the Ukrainian people loyal to the government. And sorry? I don't think it's a question for me. I see there's someone is raising hand. I'm sorry.
Sorry, please proceed, because it seems that somebody was just sidetracked, I think, but please proceed.
Okay. But I see that someone has a hand raised. I don't know if there is a question or a comment.
I think that's an accident. So, right, please proceed.
Okay. Yeah, so that was my experiment with the Donbass. So there were huge difficulties for that, because the first thing was the first problem was that many people didn't know that there was a conflict in the Donbass region, so they have to study. Many students, many international students were experimenting some difficulties with the European Union. So they didn't know what kind of action the European Union could do. I mean, they were not absolutely aware of any foreign policy tools and so on. And I also had Russian students in the group. And for them, it was extremely sensitive to discuss a situation in which Russia was, well, in that period, Russia was not the real aggressor, but Russia was supporting the so-called rebels. So some groups also, because they have to play different roles, and so there were European member states, but also the representatives of the Ukrainian government, or the representative of the rebels in the Donbass region. So also there were people asked to play the representatives of NGOs, and they were bringing documents on the IDPs in the Donbass for violations of human rights. And so Russia was already declared as an aggressor in that specific context. So it was not easy, not at all. But still, it was very, very challenging because students have been challenged. They challenge themselves in relations with, obviously, I asked the Russians not to play Russia. But still, it was difficult for Russians to assist to some debates. So it was also a responsibility for me as an instructor to try to observe discussions, trying also to manage any potential conflict. Then this is another one that I had this year. There was the case of you see I told you that the hybrid experiment. So in this case, we had there were students online and students in the classroom, but in the end, it was very easy to interact. And it was exactly in the aftermath, because I started my course in October. So 2 months after the new, the events that followed the rise of Taliban back to Afghanistan. That was extremely challenging because I asked many students, but it was obviously difficult to find a solution. Nobody was expecting a solution in there. I asked, the scenario was based on the United Nations starting to gather ideas on how a stability plan could be drafted in order to be applied in the situation in Afghanistan. And then there were students playing the role of Taliban, obviously, but there were also people playing the role of ISIS and also Turkey and Russia again. And I also involved one of my students from the OC Academy, who was in Catania as an intern for doing an internship, and he was from Afghanistan, and he was just has been just rescued. I mean, if you remember those terrible images that we all saw and watched on TV of people trying to get a place on simply running after a plane and trying to escape in some way from the country. So he was one of them. So he was stuck in Kabul for a very young guy. So the first problem is that I had in Catania, but also in the OC Academy, several Afghan students, young people, no more than 21 or 22, who have never lived a peaceful life. They have always experienced war in their life. And so for them, it can be quite difficult to play simulations, but at the same time, it can be easier to try to play the situation in Afghanistan rather than discussing the situation of what is happening in Afghanistan. So this was the main scenario, and it was very difficult because once again I had a very multicultural environment. So with students that had very different ideas of how peace should be reached and how the situation can be solved. So obviously I had students stressing the relevance of gender issue. So that, for example, I also had students from Turkey, female students from Turkey, who were stressing the relevance of protecting women, because they were obviously also in Turkey, they were suffering a difficult situation, especially for women. I also had a group of students well, not supporting the Taliban, but supporting a realist view of international politics, saying that terrorists should never be, it's impossible to negotiate with terrorists. Terrorists should always be fought with weapons. So it was not easy at all. It was very, very challenging, but once again, this helps students to interact among them with in groups and to know each other, and also to experiment notions that they have just learned on their books. But this is, I mean, this is the most important example that I would like to share with you. So it was just this year, well, this year was just 2 months ago in May, in Kyrgyzstan, teaching a course on political violence and terrorism. So for the first time, it was hybrid, because there were the African students, for example, were not in the classroom because they had no visa. And so the majority of students were from Central Asia. And I was already aware on the fact that talking about the war in Ukraine was going to be very, very sensitive, because Central Asian countries are very diverse. I don't know if you have heard that there's a part of Uzbekistan, difficult to pronounce, I cannot remember now, that was had lived for years as a self-determined area. And so the Uzbekistan has recently changed the constitution and imposed its sovereignty on that area. So the Central Asian countries may be quite diverse. The level of democracy or the level of illiberal attitude may vary, and also the situation, the condition of women is not easy, although there are some examples like Tajikistan were more radicalized, or Kyrgyzstan, which is more secular, for example. But all my students were complaining about the worsening conditions of women. And also some other students, like, again, people from Uzbekistan or even from Turkmenistan, who were strongly pro-Russia. So there are some, or Kazakhstan, some countries which are absolutely loyal to Russia. So what did I do with them? With them, I had a different kind of simulation. It was not Game of Peace, because you will see in a second, just for your knowledge, just to know what I do. A Game of Peace requires a few days of discussion and preparation. So in the course in Kyrgyzstan is very intensive. So I have just 1 week for everything. And I had just 1 day for a simulation. So I use this what I call the scenarios simulation. So I have prepared different kind of scenarios. So in the past, for example, the scenario was based on fighting against ISIS. So the question is, what is the pretending to be policy analyst and counterterrorism analyst, which scenario could be most helpful in fighting against terrorism? So now this year the scenario was what kind of solution can be most useful. So the military intervention. So we continue to provide weapons to Ukraine, but also preparing a sort of invasion, who knows, or something that may involve a stronger military support to Ukraine, which, for example, we haven't seen in Syria. So I have also played Syria with other students. Or the intelligence service, so just trying to tackle the various military units and armed groups that are currently existing in Ukraine. So we know very well that we have lots of mercenaries and lots of veterans of the Chechnya war. So Kadyrov is there celebrating his victory, and so on. Or the diplomatic one, which continues obviously to be going on, the most preferred scenario. So I played this with them, and it was it was shocking. I mean, I expected obviously there was going to be a very difficult debate, but I was shocked by receiving some comments from students from Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, from Tajikistan. Well, the guys from Tajikistan were less supportive towards Russia, but the other one saying that in the area of influence, Russian area of influence, nobody would expect to be independent. So because it's absolutely normal that Russia, that anything should be approved by Russia. So they were absolutely in favor of the war because Ukraine should have not obviously make pro-NATO statements or pro-Western opening, let's say, statement. So once again, this is for discussing the fact that simulations, I mean, playing with real stuff can be difficult or can vary depending on the context in which we are teaching. So once again, it can be relatively easy or sometimes boring teaching to Italian students who they agree on anything. I mean, the fact they know what democracy is, or rather to try to teach very sensitive issues with with students who have different views on things like conflict, war, peace, and so on. So, for example, we could not say that all students are in favor of peace or against war because they are young. Because obviously it very much depends on the context in which they are located. So we had also, apart the simulation, we also had very strong debate, very difficult debate about gender issues. So I realized that this course was very sensitive because there were students, again, from countries like Turkmenistan, particularly Turkmenistan and Tajikistan this time, most radicalized, saying that women could not expect a different condition because, so they were saying, even though they travel, they study abroad because they were in Kyrgyzstan, which is study abroad program. They learn different languages. They may also have different experiences abroad. Traditions are very important, and traditions from their own country impose such view. So this is what I have experienced in this course recently. So and I continue to confirm that simulations, working groups, because when I talk about active learning tools, I also refer to working groups, which means I split people in groups. I assign a specific task, which can be to reply a question or to write a very short policy statement and so on. Or even some scenarios discussion. So all these kind of activities which are non-traditional ones. So they do not have just to listen to me and then have some eventual feedbacks, but activities in which they have to do something and they have to manifest their views. And I still continue to believe that these tools are essential in multicultural environments, and especially in the most sensitive ones, because people can need to say what they think about this issue. So I just would like to go to the last part and then I stop because I would like to discuss with you. So this is an overview of the main experiences I had with my students. Especially in Catania, with just a sample MA course, a conflict in Syria or conflict in Darfur. Again, the conflict in Darfur was a bit easier because there was no real involvement. Even Indian students or Russian students, or I also had Erasmus students from various countries in Europe. There was no real involvement in that conflict, whereas in the Donbass, I already told you that it was much more difficult. I also had an experience in in Barcelona. So that is the the Institute of International Relations in Barcelona, where I taught an entire MA course. I spent 2 months with students, very international students, and the conflict in Syria was much more sensitive because I had many Muslim students, and also there was a Kurdish student, and so you can figure out the kind of discussions we had. And then the scenario-based simulation terrorism in Afghanistan. So just to give you an idea of the kind of action I do, the kind of activities I do, and then I stop. It very much depends on the time I have, but I usually try to allocate at least 2 weeks of my course to the simulation. Because there is some activities before the simulation. So I have to prepare the scenario, the list of groups, and I also have to prepare the roles, the instructions. I need to be very careful when, especially if I already know that I have some sensitive issues and sensitive students. And then also prior to the simulations, I also have to assist students because they need to get prepared. And that's also, we have the first, I write here the first day, but we may also say the first round of simulation. They interact in the formal way, but then obviously there's a continuation, and they have interactions until they go to the peace conference, and that's obviously the completion of the simulation. So just a few words about the EU. What is most difficult for me to teach, and because I was asked to teach a course on EU foreign policy to Indian students, and I was very skeptical because I knew, I mean, it was as part of a project which wanted to enhance the knowledge of European studies among Indian students, but I immediately had the idea that they had very, very few information about the EU. So what is most important, most difficult for me is the fact that the EU cannot be easily explained. The European Union cannot be easily explained because it's not an international organization, it's not a regional organization, it's not just a group of states trying to cooperate, because it's a group of states cooperating, but also trying to develop common positions, common objectives, and also to study, to analyze with them the so-called EU international actorness. So try to make them understand that the EU has a foreign policy. So why, for which reason the EU should have a foreign policy if it is made of states that have their own foreign policies? The most common question, especially again in the simulation. So I deliberately used the EU as a part of the game of peace simulation. So the EU was the third party interlocutor. So it was the actor expected to promote peace in the Donbas region. And still, so it was difficult because Indian students have to study a lot on about what the EU foreign policy is and what the foreign policy means in very concrete terms. And so the last part is about the briefing, which is the part I prefer, but also the part I fear most, because students eventually leave their own role. They forget about what they have done, literally, and they start freely talking about what they have done, what they have experienced, what they have felt. So simulation is a brainstorming session, very, very interactive. So I usually have a list of questions, and I try to coordinate, to chair the debate, because most of the time students talk freely, and they also express their dissatisfaction, their frustrations, their obviously also the good results they have achieved. So many students are proud of themselves, and many students are happy of what they have done, but also many of them are frustrated. So there were frictions going on, and they want to emphasize, or some of them were disappointed with the way some more sensitive issues have been debated, and so on. And once again, the fact that there are multicultural students population can be very helpful, but also very, very frustrating, because differences emerge quite visibly. So there's it is a talk on the topics which have been stressed, but also on the experiences they have done, and also to test the efficiency of the simulation. So it is also a very learning process even for me. Because I also learned from them. If it was a good experience, luckily, I always had the impression that, I mean, I've always been awarded by students, but I have also experienced several times their dissatisfaction and their frustration. So in the end, I confirm that we have lots of benefits. So in this case, I would like also to stress the last point, to build a peaceful environment, because especially when we have Muslim students or I mean, not because they are Muslim, but because they may be, or Jewish students in a Muslim community. I mean, students with a minority of students for religious reasons, or for gender issues, or for political views, it may be very difficult to make them work together, for avoiding that the minority tends to stay silent or to stay aside. And it also contributes to give the perspective that everything can be negotiated, that everything can be discussed. And so, for example, this year was having a Russian student in a class in which we talked about Donbass, and I'm afraid, I think next year that I will have still Russian students, but I will also have Ukrainian students. Because the University of Catania has opened as other universities to students who can access courses for free. And in my class, I will have 3 students from Ukraine. This can be difficult, but at the same time, there's the richness of this potential interaction. And the difficulties obviously may be quite diverse. So they have to work a lot. So in the end, they say it was a very good exercise, but it was so demanding. They had to study so much. For example, in the Palestinian I could not force anyone to do something very harsh for them. So I could never ever ask a Palestinian student to play the role of the Israeli prime minister, obviously. But I asked him, it was a male, I asked him to play another role, which was not a Palestinian. And for him, it was very, very, very difficult. So, for example, the first problem when we played the Israeli and Palestinian conflict was that people representing Israel didn't want to stay in the same room with those ones representing Palestinians. So it's very, 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 very common. And also something that always happened, that time is never enough. So they could play for weeks and months, and it's never enough, because they in the end they really like playing with what they have learned. So in the end, I would like to say that interactive learning tools are essential, because our post-COVID world, but probably it would be also post-war Ukraine world, hopefully quite soon. This will be a world in which we absolutely need to leave our traditional habits, ideas, and start thinking about diversity And so the only way to train the future generations is to push them to work together, even to quarrel, but then to explore more relational opportunities. And it's all. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Daniela, for this wonderful presentation again. And I can see that Janet has, she's clapping for you. And I think we can all join her and to clap for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And so if you have a question or comment, please feel free to raise your hand or the electronic hand. Definitely, I can see Joe. Please, could you proceed? Welcome, Joseph.
Oh, thank you very much. Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, Daniela. I've always, I think, I don't know if you're doing it again, because I loved it again the last time. I've always loved simulation. First, I'd like to ask a question. What is usually the goal during these simulation exercises? Is it to resolve the conflict by reaching the right answer, or by finding the solution that's acceptable to both parties? I ask this because you said some students come away feeling proud, and then others feel, negative maybe about how some of the issues were dealt with. So going in, what's usually the goal?
Should I reply, or do you want to collect?
Yes, please.
I can.
Yes,
okay.
Please.
Okay, Joe, thank you very much for your question. Yes, indeed. It is a very important question, because, but it's hard to say what is right and what is best in all these examples that I have mentioned. Who could say what is the best or the right solution for the conflict in Syria or in Mali that I didn't mention, but it was also part of my experiences. Well, I try to push students to identify a power sharing agreement, or to find something which can be, from a rational choice point of view, let's say, something which is closer to get people satisfied. And I mean people, I mean all parties involved in the conflict. So obviously nobody could never reach an agreement which can be the end of war, because all these conflicts are very complicated. But the sense is to push them to negotiate, to develop their soft skills, their relational skills, and to try to identify some ideas which can be useful to solve the conflict. And then obviously something which is real. I mean, I don't ask them to dream about peace. It would be nice to dream. But if they are following this course, and they need to be trained also to be good negotiators and experts of international politics, they have to be very realistic. So they have to think about real diplomacy, real political tools, and so on. So they are free to choose the tools which can be most useful to them. There are some students who are very satisfied because they think that they are being good negotiators. So especially when the agreement is signed, or they draft a common position, although it is not an agreement, but it can be a common position. And some of them may be not satisfied because they wanted to do more, or they wanted to solve the question. They are sometimes they are dreamers, and obviously they could not. Yeah, there is not a unique goal in the end, because the most important goal for me is to push them to negotiate, to interact with others, and to develop the soft skills that they usually do not develop just by studying books. I mean, they can, obviously. I'm not saying that studying books is not useful, absolutely not. But sometimes they're not aware of the skills they have acquired by studying. So when they play, they have more awareness of that.
Because at the beginning of the when you started presenting, what I thought about, I don't know how much emphasis you give to maybe sensitivity training, because I was thinking those sensitive areas, that's usually where the communication it doesn't flow too easily. You know, the communication, and those are crucial areas where that communication actually has to flow. It's like some conversations need to be had, you know, to improve the situation now, you know, it's better tomorrow. So some conversations are hard, you know, because of where we're coming from. But I think maybe we have to learn how to have those conversations and not avoid them.
Yeah. In the end, this is very, very important. Sometimes, because I have played so many simulations now, sometimes students may be more successful. So, for example, they have signed agreements. So they had they simulate the peace conference, and they are able to sign an agreement. But still, there is always someone who does not accept, like in the case of the Taliban didn't accept at all. So in the end, the UN promoted this conference, and everybody was there except the Taliban. Or so the last time, and I also see there's a question by Afez, the aim and objectives. My aim is always to have a power sharing agreement, which means a signed agreement. So in the end, they simulate a peace conference. So they can sign an agreement, or they can prepare a common paper, a common position, or a common plan, let's say. So not necessarily something which should be signed, obviously, in the simulation, but something that can reach some agreement involving the majority of all parts which are involved, if not everyone agrees. And once again, for example, once I remember that in the conflict in Syria, the Kurdish party didn't accept any solution, because there was the Kurds were not mentioned in the document, so they didn't accept. So the ultimate goal is to reach an agreement which can be more satisfying for everyone. But obviously, if this cannot be reached, students can achieve some kind of intermediate goal or goals. Although, once again, the real what I really observe is the extent to which they interact among each other, and also the level of commitment they put into the interactions. Thank you, Fez, as well.
Right.
And thank you, Joe.
Thank you. I'm just looking. Okay, Janet, please. You'll have to unmute, please. Thank you.
I just say hello to
hello.
George and everyone.
Hello. Thank you. Hello.
So I really like what you've explained. I think what you picked to do is extremely challenging. And my friend Frank, who was here last week, a historian, always says, another war. We have a whole history and a whole regional conflict background to learn, and, you know, traditions. So it seems like you're really teaching, you're really getting your students to study and learn about the region, the conflicts, the different aspects of the conflict. And another thing that I noticed that I really, really appreciate is that you invite them in a way to a simulation of deliberation. like negotiation, you know, well, we learned conflict resolution, mediation, negotiation, but negotiation on this level, I would say, is deliberation, because people have positions and they grapple, they struggle to find some kind of common step they can take and framework to move ahead. And I think it's really hard to teach that, because students in a classroom don't have a commitment. You know, they're just there. Hi, I'm here. I study. I get my grade. I turn in my paper. But you sort of put them in the position to really struggle with each other and to see you make the kinds of struggles visible that really take place in real negotiations. You know, we don't see everything, of course, but you make it more visible. So I find it really impressive. Okay, here are my questions. My questions are, what do you learn? What have you learned the most? And I'm saying the students are participating in deliberating, but do you think they really learn the skills? What more would you know, in your ideal world of teaching, what more would you want to do to move that part of the learning along? Is that clear?
Yeah, thank you very much, Janet. Thank you so much for your comments. Yes, indeed, it is very, very, very difficult. For example, sometimes I try to involve students from the BA course, but it's not easy because, as you said, BA students are not very much committed. Sometimes I try, especially I can involve not everyone in the class, but smaller groups. So I make a sort of call for participants, and I say who would like to join, and I always get some like 10 people, which is enough. I mean, if I can get 10 very committed people, even at the BA level, for me, it's a good result. MA students are different. Yes, it is true that students are usually not very committed, but at the same time, they are curious about simulations. So now, for example, that everybody knows that in my course there's a simulation. So when they start the course, they expect a simulation. And I also must confess that other colleagues have tried to do the same. So it sounds that students are quite favorable to this kind of tools. So they know, for example, that at the end of my course, they will play a simulation, they expect, and they like the idea of being very involved and learn by doing experience. But yeah, what I would like to see more, I would like to see that they have developed soft skills, more soft skills, particularly, you know, their ability to interact with other people in the world, being able to open to environments which are multicultural, because especially, well, the class in the MA course in which I teach, which I also chair since this year, is an international course. It's taught in English. So there are also students who apply are very open to this. But sometimes students are not so much open-minded. I mean, they like their comfort zone. They don't want to go out their comfort zone. And they think that the job market will be the same. So they would like to find a place or a job which is comfortable, where they have a good salary. They don't have to commit too much. I mean, this is the majority, especially during the pandemic. I have the comfort zone idea increased. So what I would like to achieve more is to push them to be very open-minded, to be real citizens of the world, to be able to live in different contexts and to find themselves comfortable in different contexts, even if they have to live or work in an environment which is far away, even mentally from their own home and family and so on. So this is because this is exactly what I learned when I was a student, and I would love to see my students as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Daniela, for that reply. There are two hands I can see. I'll begin with Achim, and then I'll go to Ian. And Ian, if it seems that you are sharing your screen, so please, Achim, if you could ask your question or make your comment.
Hi, thank you very much for the floor and also for organizing all these events on a weekly basis. And sorry for not turning on the video, but actually it's 11 p.m. in Tokyo and I'm quietly at home at the moment. I have just a very brief question to Daniela concerning the positionality of the facilitator, if we can say. Now, when you say, this is the question which is a bit of a curiosity also by the fact that you used words like, I was shocked by the ideas of the Turkmenistan students, or so it underpins these words underpins the fact that perhaps you keep a positionality as a Westerner facilitator, and this is actually in a context like, for example, in Bishkek, the OSCE Academy is quite Westernized, and the students also studying there coming from the areas around the countries in Central Asia might be more like-minded, but I remember the Slavic University in Bishkek or Arabayeva University are much more traditional, and therefore the mentality is quite different for what you might expect. But to be short, I mean, how do the students see you as a Westerner when you do this kind of exercises, in particular now for what concerns the Ukrainian-Russian conflict? Are you positioning yourself as a neutral person? The information that you are giving them are based on what sources? Are you able to speak Russian? Are you able to read Russian and provide them also information from the other side of the conflict? I mean, if we take Ukrainian as a Western position, these are the dilemmas which I'm trying to understand in your presentation. Where do you position yourself, and how the students in such cases, because they see that you are not a Russian, they see that you are coming from West, from Italy or from Argentina. So what is actually the results of this? What is their understanding of your role? Thank you.
Thank you, Akim. Yes, it is true. It is clear that sometimes my position as a Westerner is dominant. It is true. I absolutely have to confess that, especially when it's easier to talk about some issues in Catania with students, with local students. It's a completely different thing when I'm in Bishkek. So maybe I was I was using the word shocked because of the outcomes of the discussion that we were having, because there was a real quarrel in the classroom among students, because the guys from Turkmenistan were saying that women could not expect more for their own conditions, and on the other side there were other students, female students from not from Turkmenistan, but still from Central Asia, and also the female Afghan students. They were absolutely fighting and contesting what the Turkmenistan guy were saying. So in the sense, I was shocked by the fact that the people from the same community were looking at the problem from very, very different perspectives. Also, it is true that sometimes as a Westerner, we expect people to fight, to be ready to fight for democracy, or to be ready to fight for their freedom. And sometimes we are shocked when we don't see them fighting for or accepting their own conditions, because people may accept the things they live. During simulations, I try to remain as much neutral as possible. I don't speak Russian, but I ask Russian colleagues to help me in identifying those in this specific case, but I tried to do the same with other simulations, to offer the views, all views. Also, when I provide instructions, I try to be very neutral and say to students that all opinions should be expressed, that there is no limitation, there are no control, they're absolutely free to explore all conditions. And they are also, and they do. I mean, there is no, when I look at the simulations, I don't intervene in the discussion. I just look at what they are doing. I listen to what they are doing. Sometimes they ask my opinions, especially when the struggles that they fight, they are real fights sometimes. And they ask me to intervene and to do something or to say something, and I don't do anything. I continue to monitor, because obviously it is important to look at what is happening, but I don't intervene because neutrality is absolutely irrelevant. In many cases, it's not in many cases, every time it's very, very difficult to be neutral. We know very well, we all have our opinions on wars or on conflicts. In this specific case, for example, I'm very, very pro-Ukraine. Not just because I mean, Ukraine is the state was suffering aggression, but also because I was very close to Ukrainian people, was much closer to Ukrainian colleagues than to the Russian colleagues. But anyway, I don't. I try not. I don't intervene. It's the same for the situation in Mali, or the situation in Afghanistan. So I try. It was difficult because not to be against the Taliban. I mean, obviously I am against the Taliban, but I cannot say that. I mean, I also offered. I asked the students to read and also to watch videos prepared by Taliban, because I have to have a look at everything. But it is true that it's not easy to delete, to erase the fact that I'm a Westerner and I'm teaching to non-Western students. I know.
Yeah, that's great what you say, because actually I have always the impression, when I was there in Bishkek for 4 years at the UN and also at the American University, I had quite the impression that there is a certain closure as soon as they see you coming from the West, because, okay, there is also a matter of prejudice, but we should not enter in practicing proselytism or pro-Western proselytism, which actually blocks you immediately any possible discussion with some more radical views, or people with radical views. So as a facilitator, as much as you can get out from your skin, it will probably benefit also the simulation activities. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. But I also think that we all have to be very respectful of any context in which we work, regardless our job. maybe. So I have I've been very lucky to have the chance to teach in many different countries in the world, in different contexts. And for example, it was not a problem for me to wear a scarf teaching for example, in a Kurdish university, also in a Palestinian university. And I was also asked to wear a scarf, and I did. I mean, it is part of it. We should be respectful. So we cannot say, no, I don't, because I'm not local. I come from the Western, from Italy, and it's not my habit to, I do. If I want to stay among people who are different, who have different views of different religion or anything different, I need to adapt. And I think it's normal. I don't think this may decrease my job. So this is what I think.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Ian, please, you have a question or comment to make? Yes. Please.
I'm not on mute, am I? You can hear me? Thank you. Professor Daniela, you are clearly the focal point of the program. A number of questions follow from that. It's a most impressive program. I'm very impressed that it has such application in so many countries. How many staff apart from you are involved from the university? And to what extent do you see the program being expandable? And if it's to be expanded, can it be done by your university alone, or is it financed and supported by the European organization that you're involved with? And if it is to be expanded, what resources would be necessary? And have you considered talking to the Rotary Foundation, which, as I presume you know, funds 7 university training courses, peace training courses around the world, to see how your program can be linked into that, or whether they would like to assist you directly with an expansion of the program?
Oh, thank you so much, Ian. Thank you so much for your questions and comments. Actually, I must confess that I'm alone. I do everything by myself. I don't involve other staff. So I prepare my own the scenario and roles and all the materials that I just gave you a sample of the things I do. I prepare all PowerPoints. I prepare all documents. I have contacts with my colleagues when I have to prepare the scenario and the list of readings. And so everything, and this is why I was telling you that it's very time consuming, because I don't have help, but I don't have any teaching assistants, I'm afraid, with me in Catania. Sometimes I have internships. So students will do internships, and they like to be teaching assistants. From them is an helpful experience. In that case, for example, I have some people who can assist me, but they are temporary assistants. So I do everything by myself. I have applied, I submitted this application to this European competition. And so I've been awarded, and what the award consisted in that my model has been included in a sort of repository of best practices, which is available, which I can also share with you. It is available and at the disposal of everyone in the world who is interested in knowing more about examples like Game of Peace. And I was asked to prepare a short article to be included in such repository. So this is what I won, let's say. And so, for example, I have received some emails from different colleagues in different parts of the world. We wanted to know more about this model. And I've always replied, so I probably, my example is also followed in other universities, but obviously this is a model which can be used by any instructor in international studies courses. So any course which require, as Janet was saying before, mediation or conflict resolution, or where there are specific studies on this, can be employed. It would be great. I've never thought of submitting a grant proposal, for example, because it's so difficult to get support. I mean, I was the first one using simulations in my university, and people were, I'm not saying that they were teasing me, but they were very skeptical because they were saying too much work, too much overload. But it would be great to have a grant to submit a proposal, because, for example, it would be great to have groups, 2 or 3 groups of students in a university in Catania, for example, coming from different universities, or somewhere else in Brussels, in Geneva, I mean, a place which is representative from a diplomatic point of view. And people from different universities spending at least like 10 days simulating. So it would, I don't think that would cost too much. It could cost just, expend the travel expenses for students and instructors, maybe. So if we can have, if I can have, for example, a grant for paying expenses, for bringing money for bringing 15 students of mine in Geneva, and stay there for 10 days simulating together with other students coming from other universities, that would be great. Students would do a training session. So, I mean, these things happen. There are organizations who are asking fees, and students pay fees, and so they go at the UN model, for example. So it already exists. But in that case, people are paid and they go there and meet other people from other universities. In this case, it would be a group of students already being together and already trained together, and for them spending a period in another place and training other students. That would be great. But I never applied. Because I don't know whether this could be accepted or supported, because I already explored, I must confess, I have already explored these chances, but then I was told people already have a UN model, which is professionally run by organizations. So what's the sense for you to have money for doing the same thing? So this is the reason why I'm so skeptical, and I never tried, but I could. I mean, if there is the right grant scheme, yeah, it would be a good idea. Thank you. And thank you, Janet. So kind.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Daniela. There is actually probably the last question I could see in chat from Sakina Faru. She's asking about the methods or techniques that you use to control students when you are teaching them. Probably, there might be some disagreements or whatever. So please, would you respond to that?
Yeah. Well, there are some instructions which are given at the very beginning. So the students know that regardless the role they're playing and what they are discussing, they have to be respectful. They don't have to use, they have to use a proper language, not to being offensive, not to offend anyone, not to be, and also not limit the use of violence. I'm saying that because students need to be very realistic, and so we know very well that in conflict resolution, violence is unfortunately, military attack is unfortunately always one of the options. So students have to know in advance that they need to leave this as a last resort. So they need to be very realistic, but at the same time, their main aim is to build peace, not to worsen violence. So I usually listen, and only in the few cases, but it never happened actually, that fight become, when I say fight, I mean there are people quarreling in the room. They never reached the extreme dimension, let's say. But if I see that discussions start to be a bit brutal, offensive, so only in that case I may intervene and invite people to moderate themselves and to moderate the use of language. So I always listen to them, although they are meeting in different rooms, even virtual rooms. I do the round and physically or virtually, and I also try to control.
Thank you so much. I don't see another question, but also it's about time we finished for today. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you very much indeed, Daniela, for this wonderful presentation, for your time again with us. And I thank everybody for participating, for your contributions, and for being with us. And this is, as you know, it's a weekly exercise. And so we have an opportunity to learn something new every week, if not every day. And so I'd like to invite you again next week on next Wednesday, as usual. We use the same link and the same time. There's no summertime, wintertime in Tanzania, in Africa. So it's a lot easier for us to remember. And so thank you very much indeed, and all the best.
Thank you very much for inviting me again. Thanks.
It's a pleasure.